Okay, so I'm in Painter, and I want to show you a couple things about like generators, how we add things like grunge, grime, and detail, and just a couple other cool tools that I think you can really use in here that we haven't used up until this point. Now, since we have a full set of texture maps, and we need to make sure we have all these maps, we don't need an ID map, although they can be helpful. Definitely look those up. It can really help speed up some of the painting process, but I didn't really feel the need to do it for this character. We had enough stuff to work on. We can start thinking about materials that we want to put on the character in different areas. And I like to think about this section at a time. So let's start with something like, I've been starting with the shirt. I think the shirt's a great way to start. So let's pull up my character reference here. And it's sort of a cream colored, probably linen shirt. This is a great place to go to some of my reference to look for like the patterns, like the fabric patterns on it, as well as things like where some of the wrinkles might be. I don't have to do it completely accurate to that. I'm just trying to get the idea. So let's start with the shirt. Under layers, I'm going to create a new folder because a folder is where I'm going to start putting everything. I'm going to name this shirt, and I'm going to start actually adding a black mask to this. So I'm going to show you using the shirt like a couple of the tools that we can use. So under the shirt, let's go ahead and add a color. Just going to add a fill layer. I use a lot of fill layers for things. Created 2 fill layers. I'm going to drag this into shirt, and we're going to call this something like base color. And this will be the color that the whole shirt is based off of. So let's start adding in our color, and I can use this eyedropper, which fortunately, unlike a lot of programs, will eyedrop anything. So I can actually go straight into my character's color here. Now, again, I want to start from there and go a little lighter and exaggerate it just a little bit. Great. So this is my base color, and now I can add to my black mask by selecting on it, because this is in this folder. Again, I can close it, I can open it, and I'm going to use that little tool, this polygon picker tool in here. And then I can fill it by triangles and squares and full objects. I'm going to select it by full objects because this whole thing, oops, wrong one. This whole thing is one whole shirt right here. So that's going to give us the basis of what we're doing. And in here, we get to choose things like its overall roughness. It's fabric, so it shouldn't be very shiny. It should be relatively rough, but it's going to have a little bit of shininess, so it's not going to be all the way. We don't need our height information or anything like that yet, but we do want to start putting a pattern on this, like a linen or a fabric. So let's go ahead and look in here. I can come down to the shelf and type fabric, and there's all sorts of different patterns that we can find in here. Different houndstooths or crosses or checkers. Some things that you might find as interesting details. But some of these weaves and folds can be the kind of thing we're looking for in our mesh. So I might look through these, and of course I can get my own, and there's other fabrics I can start from. Like I could start from one of these rough fabrics, especially if I sometimes type in, like maybe if I type in linen, I can find something. Oh, here's one called fabric linen worn and fabric linen creased. That might be a nice start. So let's put it in here right under. And under, it's got a whole other folder, and you can see all the other things. It's got its own base color. So I can adjust that base color to make it closer to the base color I want. I got the fabric base here, which is where I can change like the scale. Let's see, you can turn these on and off. Let me see which one, this one. Okay, so these are the fibers. So I definitely want the fibers scale to be up quite a bit higher. These lighter fibers, same thing, let's up its scale. Fabric base, what is this working with? Okay. Just turning things on and off to see what they do on my character. Not yet figuring out, there should be, wherever our projection, I'm looking for where our scale, okay, these are the little creases, how often they pop in. I'm looking for the scale of the actual, like, oh, this is it, it's this weave. So I probably want it to be a little smaller. And I'm going to turn off these lighter, this fabric pattern. I don't think I need these. I just delete those. So taking a look here, messy fibers, trying to get the right scale of things. You don't have to go too big on it. And anything that looks like too heavy, like this creases, feels pretty heavy. I want to go into normal because it's doing all of this in my normal direction. And I can turn that down to normal, and I can turn that down in height. So it's not quite as strong of an effect. Something like that is kind of what I'm playing with. I want to show you a couple other things we can do. Like maybe I want to add more dirt and grime and detail and things. Well, this is where, especially if I'm looking for a more stylized thing, like I really want to get these shadows in, or like get the idea of like the top is lighter color, the bottom is a darker color. We can start building these things by hand instead of just using these like base kind of creases. So again, going back to this, starting with my base color here, just based on the shirt, and let's add another layer, but it's going to be a completely different color. And I'm going to start with red just because it'll blend in for me really well. And I'm going to show you how we can use some of these generators. So I'm going to add into this another black mask. So it's got its own black mask inside of this black mask that's deciding it's the shirt. This black mask is where we can start adding these generators. I have no generators selected here. I can pick them from here, but I personally find it easier to go into the shelf and look at these different procedural generators. So like these different masks are also a great place to sort of choose a lot of these. In our desk generator though, we have a lot of things like our linear gradient, things like 3D distance. Light is an interesting one because it's going to be from the top. World space normals is going to be like again, that direction it looks at. Let's do something where it's a little bit stronger. For instance, like we want to do that under. So let's try light. So now you see what happens with light is anything that's facing sort of forward in this case and more upwards, we can change the different angles. So we can say it's going to go straight, just straight down like this instead of under, sort of top lighting our character. Maybe we want to like do a little under shadowing built in. So let's set this under. So this is sort of under lighting what's happening with our character. We can choose the strength and sharpness of it and how subtle it is because it's taking in our world space normal and our position map. And then in here, under color, I'm going to turn off height, roughness, metalness, and normal because I want it to keep the same ones. And with color, let's add like a blend here. So we're going to add like a little darker, deeper. Like if we go pure black, it just kind of goes like that. But what we want to add is like maybe a little deep, dark ochre yellowing to the overall color. And so even if I change up the lighting, I have sort of this underlayer, and I can do something the opposite of it. I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to do like a white light bleached top instead. So same thing, I'm going to do this light filter instead of my angle going up. I'm going to take my angle going straight down. Let's pull this back. So I have like a base that again I can play with or interpret. And I can create highlights and lowlights using these other little light objects, which you might find is really useful on your characters, especially when you come to some of the different materials. And I'm sort of baking it in to the lighting. This is how people do like a stylized lighting or stylized character effect on something like that. Let's take a look too at some of the, I want to show you maybe one other effect in this video, and then we'll go in and I'll start just painting things out and adding more details. So I'm going to add another object in here. This is going to be the vest. So I want another folder. Again, the folders are really handy for this. So I can close shirt and now I have vest. I'm going to add a black mask and I'm going to use that tool to get just the entirety of the vest. If I ever want to remove something, so I'm painting it white, white means it's there and I can see the object, whereas black means it's removing it from the thing because it's white is showing and black is not. I'm going to put something in it so we can see it. And let's get our vest color. Eyedropper tool. Trying to find a good average green. So like this is a nice neutral. It's kind of in the shadow, but it's also like going to be a fairly neutral color for us. Make sure it's in the vest folder. And then we can fill this in. And, you know, it starts with the color here, but I realized like I want to play with it a little bit. So I'm going to move it a little closer to green. Saturation. A little less saturated, maybe play with the lightness a little bit, something like that. Is a little closer to the character's color that I'm looking for. As before, it's going to be less rough, but not quite as. It's going to be a little shinier than the shirt is. Not by much, it's sort of a silky kind of a thing. But what I really want to get, and I want to show you, is something like this pattern in here. And how do I get that? As I mentioned, there's a bunch of interesting texture patterns. Let's duplicate this layer, and I'm going to make this a different color. So in this case, I'm going to make this a lighter green color. So just pop in here and up the lightness, and I'm going to add a black mask to this because this is where I'm going to put in a nice pattern. Into here, I'm going to do add fill because I'm filling it in with a particular grayscale. So I can go and look for one of those fabric patterns. Maybe I can find a nice ornate pattern that I like in here. So something that feels, again, I could pull a repeating fabric pattern off the internet, but I might find one in here that kind of does what I'm looking for. And some of these are pretty cool. So I like this one. I like this one. I like the Celtic one also. I think this, looking at these, the diamonds are cool. I'm just going to find one. Of course, there's, like I said, lots of people. These fleur-de-lis are pretty cool. They also have a good style to them. I think, though, I'm going to go with something pretty noisy overall, like this round square. And so I can just drop it into this grayscale and then change up its tiling. And any number that's too small for me, I can always just raise it up. And so now this is my lighter color, this is my darker color, and I can always change these anytime I want, which is the nice thing about fills, because I can just change whole things about this pattern as much as I want. But the nice thing is too, since this is going on here, I can add like a little more roughness, so I can make it a little shinier on this parts. So if you see, if we rotate our light around a little bit, you get more shininess in this area, and we can use our height to just raise it out a little bit. So it gives us a little bit, just like you want to go really subtle. If you go too far, it looks really kind of gross. We go really subtle with it, it just gives it a little bit of a raise. We could even put a little metallic in it. You know, like it's a little metallic thread that maybe just gives us a little sheen that we don't have elsewhere. And maybe I decide it's a little thick on the pattern, so I can add more like filters. So I'm going to take this filter here. Let's do a blur first, because that's going to sort of, we do just like a really, really low resolution blur. And then I'm going to add another, let's do a levels. And this is just going to let us kind of crunch back and decide, like maybe we want to tighten up this pattern a little bit. So it's going to make some of it disappear based on some of the parameters I have. Just lets me play with it a little bit and get some different style and some different like efforts. But we can also add cool little details, like stuff we didn't put in here, things like seams and buttons. And this is what's really cool about what we can do in Painter that can save us a lot of time for stuff we don't need to do in here. So it's kind of the last thing I'll show in this video. And then we'll just show you how I'm going to hit a couple other areas. In the same vest thing, I'm going to add another fill. And this one, I'm I'm going to call, drag it in. I'm going to call this one seams. This is in the vest, and it's not going to have, let's just turn everything off except for color for a little bit. So what I'm going to do is in seams, you know, and I'm going to add a mask just like I do with anything else. Give it a color just like I do with anything else. I like to use red because that's my color that just says this is where my effect is going. I'm going to add a paint. So what paint is going to do is if I use my paintbrush here, I can paint on things, but I want to use a very tiny brush because I want to paint on just where that seam is going to go. And since I'm only on this area, I can paint through the model. And actually, since we've got a symmetrical model, let's turn on symmetry. It's going to give me that line. And I can now paint where the seam on my shirt kind of here would go. So again, it's not a seam yet, but it will be. I'm using the same techniques to add a filter after it, and that's going to let me blur things out. Again, I love these blurs because they're very procedural and they let me control things. So I start with a line and I blur it because if I blur it, I've smoothed out the transition in a way that lets me add levels and then compress things. So I can make it wider or sharper or tighter by pulling these together. This kind of lets me choose the line size. I don't want it to completely disappear though. So maybe we do something like this, tighten it up a little bit that way. Definitely see if I can get rid of this blur. Maybe I can play with these levels a little bit. Go that way. I kind of cut, I feel like the blur is too heavy. And maybe I'll just reduce its intensity so that my levels can sort of do its job a little bit better. That's what more we want. Like we can tighten up that line a little bit more. So now I did all of this just so I can turn off color, but now I can turn on height and push it into the model. So now I have a seam and it's procedural and I can repaint it and I can change it and I can give it as much strength as I want. And again, I did it all in symmetry, so it's symmetrical. Let's do the little stitching now. We can build stuff on top of things too. So let's add, just like before, in here, add a new layer. This will be stitches. So these little gold thread stitches running along the side. Let's turn off everything but color for now. Set my color to red. Add a black mask. And just like before, I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to add a paint layer. And I'm going to stitch on a couple of these so I can get a little sloppy with it even. This is how we can add some of these little details. And now I can change their color to something more like a gold. Of course, it's gold thread, so we want a pretty light color because we'll be using tight, rough, and metal. So it's going to be shinier, it's going to be metallic thread, and we need to give it some height. And one of the problems you can see here, I might not want to do metallic completely, might not fit the style, might have to do just make them orange and relatively shiny. I guess that's up to your interpretation. I don't want to go too realistic, so I feel like sometimes the physically based rendered stuff gets a little too real. But what I can do now is you can see, well, I've got this, but it still has this crease. In stitches under height, so if I set this to height mode instead of L dodge, I can change the mode so it's not blending with what's under it. So I can change my blending mode in stitches to something else. It'll let me. Well, it doesn't seem to want to let me switch it to something else. I don't know why. It's on my other monitor? Oh, weird. It showed up on my wrong monitor. So if I set it to normal, it treats like a normal thing and it actually sits on top of it. So again, I can paint that and I can do things like buttons the same way. Let's do another layer. And I like to do these as separate because I can control these, I can change these. So one more of these, let's add a new mask, add black mask. That little pattern kind of went away. And let's add this as buttons. And for the buttons, I know on my layer, same thing. Let's give it a nice red color. And in here, we're going to add paint. And let's now get a little bit more precision with this. Instead of just painting it on and trying to get like circles, I'm going to sort of stamp it on using one of these brushes or alphas. So under paint, these are now my paint settings. I have an alpha shape, which is, fortunately for us, if it wasn't already, it's got this sort of circle shape to it that I can stamp on. So let's start with something relatively large, and let's go 1. I gotta get what, like 3 in there? So I'm gonna stamp 1 down here. Let's go a little smaller. I'm trying to get the brush size the right size. Control and right mouse is controlling my brush size on things. Oh, so sorry, I realized I haven't been using my hotkey thing. That's the one that's got my hotkeys on it. Apologies, folks. So I can go stamp right here. And then I'm going to create 1, 2, 3. Just like before, I'm going to use levels because this will help me control the outsides. So I can like kind of tighten their position a little bit, but I'm still going to get that dome. You can still see that because I want like an immediate cutoff when it should start. And this also lets me choose the size by playing with these. And then, just like with the other guy, bump up that height. Let's give it the right base color. Give it the right roughness. We can go metallic if we want. Oh, in this case too, I realized I had symmetry turned on, but that's fine because I can show you how we get rid of this. Let's turn symmetry off so we don't have that line. And I can use this erase tool to just erase anything I don't want from the pattern. But see, I've got all this now, and now I have control over how these buttons are interpreted, how wide and how tight they're going to be. Nice. So I want to show you this one, just a couple things. We can add some more details, things we didn't model in that we can actually paint into the model and give us detail where we didn't have any before. In the next one, I'm going to go through a couple other areas, maybe show you. Oh, I didn't even model that scarf. I guess I could bring that in as a separate thing. And just show you a couple other things that you might want to know about for doing your overall character.